This is Making Better Decisions. I'm your host, Ryan Sullivan. Decisions are where rubber meets the road for organizations. Each week, we'll be learning from people who are on the front lines of turning raw data into better outcomes for their organizations. This show is sponsored by Canopy Analytic, helping companies make better decisions using data. Today's guest is an accomplished category manager in the food and beverage industry, brings a wealth of expertise and a proven track record of success. With a focus on negotiation, category management, and analytics, he thrives in crafting strategic solutions that drive business growth. Driven by a passion for excellence and a commitment to organizational success, he's poised to make impactful contributions wherever he goes. Working on the category management team at the Boston Beer Company as the Space Assortments and Systems Lead, please welcome Shawn Egan.
Hey, Ryan. Hey, everybody. Thanks for having me out today.
Yeah, I'm super pumped to get you on here. I think that, you like me were a pretty early adopter of some of this modern data stuff. So I'm excited to kind of dive right in and kind of ask you our big kind of springboard question, which is, what is one thing you wish more people knew about using data to make better decisions?
Yeah, I think there's a couple answers there, and it depends on, who the person that you're talking about is, right? Like if it's the audience, if you will, who you're serving is someone, often in our business of using data, you're serving a sales audience or a leadership audience. So from that perspective, I would say the one thing I wish that audience had more of is good questions, right? Like asking the right questions about data. So often we get requests that are, specific to like, hey, I need this piece of data, or I need this. And they don't necessarily start with the problem we're trying to solve, which makes it a lot more difficult to provide good results. And the reality is oftentimes, you may provide that, but there was a much better solution available if you just had the right question from that, stakeholder. I think on the other side of things, in our seat, right, the people that are utilizing the data to help people influence or make, organizational decisions, I think the answer there is a little more knowledge of the business, right? Like being able to understand how the realities of the world work versus just the numbers and the data. It's all too often, I think people that work with information and data are really good at that, or they're good at technology, or they're good at, a specific code language, and yet they may not have as much experience with what's happening in the stores or in the actual business itself. From my industry, it's very much the stores, right? It's retailers, businesses, it's wholesalers, warehouses. And there's a very stark difference between those two types of audiences. So those are the two answers I would give for that, that
Yeah.
question.
Yeah, I love those both. I mean, I've thought a lot about, I want to circle back to the first point you made because there's a lot of meat there, but I've thought a lot about like, what is the right way to engineer a team, right? Because you're right. Like you're going to have people that are like in the day-to-day nitty gritty. That's their subject area. And then you're going to have other people, kind of like us who are like a little bit more on the like tech nerd data spectrum. And I've always struggled with like, okay, like how much do I want to enforce like one to be the other in like some, what's the right balance there? And I gotta be honest, I haven't really found like a perfect prescription. The thing that I have found is that like when you meet people that are like a good fit for one of those roles, like either being like on the business side that interfaces with the tech or vice versa, you just kind of know it, right? There's just like people that kind of have that gene that like
Totally.
can kind of see, they like the translator gene, if you will, and they just kind of like get it. So it's one of the things that, has interested me over time, that it's something, maybe down the road I'll be able to be more prescriptive about it, but it really just comes down to like finding those right people.
Yeah,
And it,
man, it's been ever since I got into this world of information, it took me a long time to figure it out. And I'm not pounding my chest here at all, but I feel like from my kind of upbringing in CPG, it was purely sales, right? I worked with Coca-Cola. I worked with a little startup called Glasso, which ended up being Vitamin Water was one of their key brands. It was sold to Coca-Cola,
Yeah.
but back to Coke. All of that experience eventually landed me a sales job at Boston Beer Company. And through a few years of doing that, I just kind of got lucky and got involved with our category management team and really figured out pretty quickly that I love working with information and using it to influence decisions, right? So what me and some of my coworkers that think the same way here
Mm.
kind of call them unicorns, right? Because the unicorn is an elusive animal, fantastical animal, right? And uh, to find people that have the right balance of business experience and some sort of curiosity or knowledge uh, in technology and data is really rare. And so to your point, I don't think there's a perfect formula or like, a personality exam you could give to somebody to figure it out. Cause, if you looked at my PI, other than being really high D, which is high attention to detail, like all my other stuff is like pure sales, right? So to profile someone that way, that equation you're talking about, I don't know if that's necessarily possible. It's just
Yeah.
finding those unicorns,
Yeah.
really try to, in category management, in CPG, it's very much a balance of that. Cause you have to get out and influence, you have to work with different levels of customers, whether it's internal stakeholders or, retailers or wholesalers, and got to be able to put together the information, figure it out. So you have to have a certain level of technical aptitude, but then you have to have a certain level of understanding of the business that's going to put you in that sales seat, right? Like be able to influence what you've put together or influence with what you've put together. So it's tough, man. And it goes south pretty quick when you get the balance wrong,
Yeah.
in my industry.
One of the things that I think is funny, like I liked how you brought up personality tests. Like I've been, part of multiple consulting teams where we've gotten those personality tests done, and you kind of think that there will be like a big, trend in one direction. It's kind of been really surprising to me how diverse personality type wise the consulting teams I've been a member of have been. Um, like if you do the same thing with entrepreneurs, right? It's all like everybody is in one corner of the room, right? Or like, like there are certain things where it's like, nah, it's like we can tell what makes people do this. But, you know, I can tell for sure one thing that it's not. Like one way to make sure that we don't have success. And that is, we were talking about this the other day. Like if I decided that I was going to build a new business and I was going to have it all run on paper, right? We're gonna like keep paper records and we're gonna do everything. But then we've got like a couple guys, and girls over on a team over here. And there are computer people. So like anything computer related, they take care of that. We like just like we give them like lots and lots of paper and they like just put that in terms of, and then anytime I have a computer request, I just call them up and I'm like, hey, I don't know how to connect to the printer. In fact, like, can you just like you just do the whole thing and just give it back to me as paper?
Yeah.
Like anybody that hears that is like, well, of course that won't work. Right. But then sometimes I definitely see people like organizationally, whether they realize that that's what they're building or not, they're building that as their data infrastructure. Right. And it's like we have this like, only these people understand data. Like there has to be some sort of blend. And like it's, the same thing, right? Like people that aren't, fully utilizing tech are going to get surpassed by people that are. At
Yeah.
least in the long term, right? Like people can have like amazing ability, but like over a long period of time, it's just impossible to compete with the efficiency,
Yeah.
but
I think
go ahead.
from that first question that you'd asked, talking about things I wish people, knew more about with data. And I said, asking the right questions was a big one for the stakeholder audience.
Yeah.
Um, you don't have to know if you're on that side, you're not so technically savvy. You're not someone that works with data a ton, but you do use data to influence decisions. All you have to know is what is possible or what the right questions are, and
Mm,
then how team around you. And the sky's the limit at that point. I think on the other side, like I mentioned earlier, I think over the last 10 years, right, there's been so many different things that have come to the market in terms of, reporting layers, technology, the explosion of predictive technologies, all of that stuff. Um, in that audience that's in that realm, developing the right business rhythms of spending time with the stakeholders, because not everybody can be that unicorn, right? But everybody can take the right amount of time and ask the right questions back to that first audience, to avoid becoming, the name or the email behind a computer that's just pushing databases and, reports out.
Yeah.
So, I don't want to use that cliche term because I kind of it's kind of cringy, but the art of the possible is like a big part of both sides of those audiences, in my opinion.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm really glad that you brought that up and that you connected that back to the question that I wanted to get back there anyways around like, what are some of the right questions? And I agree with you, right? Like, it's not necessarily like, hey, like, oh, I have some executive and they just like, like sometimes there's just like, oh, the dumb executives. And it's like, nah, that's not really been my take. You know what I mean? Like, usually people are pretty smart, right? It's like these technologies and like the capabilities that they have just like moved forward so fast that like, unless you're someone that like makes that your area of expertise, like you're just not going to know what's out there.
Right.
Like, there are lots of folks that I talk to, and they're like, "Hey, we have this report in Excel, and it's, like, really tiresome to keep manually repeating, and so told me that you can, like, make it so it's just, like, it just stays live."
Yeah.
And I'm like, "Definitely. We can definitely do that. Yeah, we'll, like, figure out what the steps are that you're doing to, like, pull everything together, and we can just automate those, and, we'll make some new visuals, and we'll put it out in the front." And they're like, "Great." I'm like, "All right, so, like, show it to me," right? Like, what are you guys looking for in the future?
Yeah.
Right? And they're like, "Okay, so we want, like, this grid with a scroll bar, like, just like a big rectangle, one page with the and then we'll export that to Excel." I'm like, "Okay, cool. We can build that. However, let me just show you some other things," right? And the thing that always gets them, right? Like, you open up one of these tools that has, like, cross filtering, right? Like, I use Power BI or, like, Tableau, or, like, lots of
Yeah.
these
Yeah.
tools do this now, but, like, you could, like, show them, like, a bar chart next to a pie chart, and you click one of them, and the other one filters, and they're like,
Yeah.
like, just
I
the
mean,
idea that I can go in and interrogate a report instead of just, like, print it or export it. Like,
yeah.
even that right there is a huge example of, like, "Hey, this is a thing you can ask for now."
Yeah. Yeah. So when you mentioned Power BI, when Power BI hit the scene, I was and our team was pretty into Power Pivot as well. And we figured out what we could do with Power BI. Um, Rather than, just try to explain it to people. One of the things that at the time I was a category manager. Actually, I'm going to sidebar real quick. I believe you were looking at my LinkedIn. You remind me, I need to update my LinkedIn. I'm actually in a slightly different role now. I'm still with the category team, but I have branched off. Instead of leading the category managers, I actually lead a more technical team that supports them. It's a team that I actually built when I was leading the category team, and someone left, and I took that over about, about 8 months ago. So, anyway, sidebar for all those that are listening and looking at my LinkedIn, I do need to update it. Um,
Yeah, we
no-
can cut that. I'll re-record it, so I wanna intro you right.
yeah, it's no problem at all. But back when that software was really just hitting the market, and I realized what we could do with it, I would go into uh, a call with a buyer, and I would have my PowerPoint with the things I was trying to accomplish or whatever. And I started bringing along a copy of Power BI Desktop on my machine. And one of my favorite things to do was just kind of say, "Hey, you were talking about this thing that was giving you a hard time, or this question that you had, as we were in between slides or something. Let's see if we can answer that question right now."
Mm,
And fire that thing up. And to your point, the sort of you know, the mind bender of like cross filtering visuals at the time, gosh, this was like 10 years ago now or
yeah,
something like
yeah.
that, it's like, and that, interestingly enough of those moments happen to where, certain audiences would see things like that, and you're like, I want that. I want that for my business. And we actually inherited a lot of situations that we got our hands on data because of those moments, which was just phenomenal at the time. Now everybody's kind of caught up to that speed now. I mean, you mentioned Tableau as well. Everybody's reporting with either Power BI or Tableau or something that's built in house that does the same kind of thing.
Yeah.
But along the lines of that journey, now it's not, can you, build a reporting layer and like go wow somebody with some cool features or some great, code. It's really now it's, are you making actionable things happen from your data? So I
Yeah.
think, I've been reading a lot of articles, about kind of what's coming around the corner. And, as I thought about that first question and I answered it, I think that's going to be the difference maker, is the connection to the business, or on the stakeholder side, the ability to know what's out there and be really, really good at that. Cause everything else, like, you're going to find experts, you're going to find people that are really good salespeople, really good, at crushing databases and turning them into awesome reports. But is that report creating action? That's
Yeah.
going to be, that's the next 5 years, is like, who can get really, really good at that? That's the difference maker, right? And it goes from that grid you were talking about to, okay, cool grid, bro, but what are you doing with it? One of my favorite moments in working with people is, a lot of times they'll start from the end. They'll come to me with a problem. We'll identify what they're trying to solve, and I'll say, okay, how were you doing this before you came to me? And they'll pull up, like you said, like a spreadsheet or a grid of some sort. And they'll say, well, this is what I did to kind of get to what I thought the answer was. And that's one of my favorite things, because you can kind of back into the answer, but also back into a much cooler solution that can create more action right from what you're looking at, instead of having to go to Excel, make another chart. It's like, figure out the way to turn it into action. I think that was, one of your experiences, where we first met, was one of the mantras was like, like, what was it saying? It was like, uh, take data and turn it into information, and then
Yeah.
take information and turn it into action. Everybody can build a really cool report, but what is it telling you?
Yeah. I love the story there. Like, I had similar experiences where, I think prior to this revolution, I think you're right. I do think you accurately assess that, like, a good chunk of the market has caught up. Like, there are people at most companies that are doing something like what we do,
Yeah.
and hopefully they're using some modern tool to get there. There are a lot of people that are still hacking it out in Excel pretty manually, and that, I want to save those people. But um when it comes to the rubber actually meeting the road, I think you're right. Like, that's definitely a place where the market is, like, there's room for differentiation there.
You know,
And I remember, this is way, way back in the day before I was even a consultant. I worked at a phone company, and we had been building some, like, really, really cool stuff. It was like the first place that I found out about these tools. Like, there were a couple guys that were there before me that were using this kind of stuff. And I was just like, I called one of them up and I was like, I need to get more than a million rows into Excel. Can you, like, they told me to call you. Do you know how to do that? And they were like, oh, welcome. and, and so, like, that started the journey for me. I started hanging out with these guys and I got, like, really good at all that stuff and I really enjoyed it. But I went into one of these meetings, and at this point it was just like kind of like a skunk works unit. Like, there were like 4 or 5 of us. We were like all on different teams and we would all just like hang out and like build crazy stuff together. And we were like secretly helping each other with our projects to try and like move it forward just because we like loved doing it.
yeah,
And so then I get like called into some meeting. So and so is like, hey, we like heard that you know something about product data. And I'm like, yeah, sure. What's the question? And they like ask, some executive that I would not otherwise be talking to, like, asked me the question. And I'm like, exactly what you said. Like, sure, let's see if we can answer that now. And I just like shared my screen, and, like, pulled something up, and they were like, it's that concept of, before that. So, and the executive asked the same question, you know, Alice, can you have your team look into this portion of it? Bob, can you have your team look into
Yeah,
this
let's
portion
double
of it?
click into that.
Yeah, yeah, and so, like, Alice and Bob go off and their teams do stuff, and then, like, they come back with the answers a week later, and they're like, "Hmm, that's interesting, like, I wonder if this is the reason," right? So you're like it's like 2 or 3 meeting iterations before you actually get to, like, a meaningful answer to the question, as opposed to, like, now you can answer those questions in the meetings instead of
Well,
after
and
them.
that moment is so critical. That moment of like, again, to go back to the first thing, like when you ask that right question, if you are able to get an answer, you've got an inspired moment, and action
Mm,
can come from that inspiration. Whereas you wait 3 meetings and maybe something else has come up, or maybe you've had a bad day, or, maybe there's a new shiny object, there's a Band-Aid put on the question from 3 meetings ago, and that's good enough. Right.
mhm.
So that moment is very important. That moment of inspiration, if it's coupled with really good insight, can make decisions quickly, and it
Yeah,
can sometimes be like the best decisions that you make. Um, I'm not saying like you should rush to decisions, but I am saying that moment of inspiration is where a lot of like really good ideas come from. And if you miss it,
100%. If
one-
you have all the information that's necessary to make a good decision and it's clearly laid out, then it's not really a rush, is it? Right? Like your point's totally right. Like if
yeah,
we've done our job making sure that everything's there and like the right decision for a situation is super clear, I just think of like the number of hours and the number of people that sit on or in those meetings. And it's just like, hey, imagine like cutting that in like 1/10.
yeah,
How like but for everybody, like how much more efficient does an organization get when like hours of meetings per person gets cut to 10% of what it was? Like probably pretty good, you know?
you know,
Um, that's really cool. One of the other things that I kind of wanted to dig in with you because like you've been to this rodeo a couple times now, is all right, let's say I'm a business person that's interested in data, or vice versa, right? I'm one of these like, data nerds that's like interested in business. And I think we talked about how like there is like a gene for the person that has like the drive to learn about the other side. But like, what suggestions or recommendations do you have for a person like that to try and bridge the gap? And then if you have the time to get to it, what advice do you have for decision makers on how to find those people?
yeah. All right. So I guess I'd start on the side of the technical crew, because I didn't come from that world. I
Yeah.
didn't come from business intelligence or IT. The first thing I would say is please be patient with the people on the business side, because they are not always up to speed on all the possibilities, right? So that's one thing I would say. But for that group of folks, one of the things I experienced personally, and if any of them are, end up listening to this, they'll know who I'm talking about. But um, they having the lens of like, hey, this person's really motivated. They're sharp enough, and they know the business. Ultimately, will save the technical side, the IT side, the BI side, save them time and energy, right? The idea of concierge BI is it's a time suck for people that are building those things, because the business is so nimble now in most cases, can't constantly be building. So giving someone on the business side that's apt and curious the things they need to do it on their own is part of the magic of self-service, right? It's magic in a lot of ways. So um, being able to spot those people and look through it as through the lens of like, hey, this actually could save us time, create art that wasn't there, through, labor savings, time savings, and also, them closing the deal, right? And feeling more of an ownership of that, it can be very lucrative. I will say from that experience that I had, um, not only working with the data, but using the data to influence it, basically all in the same capsule. You know your insights inside and out, so you can be very convicted about what you're talking about. And like when questions come out about, oh well, where'd you get that piece of data, or like what else about the information? You don't have to say, oh, I got to call somebody else, or I got to schedule another meeting. You actually know it because you put it together, and that tech technology or enablement of technology and data
Mm.
is like critical to that. So finding those people and acknowledging them and giving them the leeway and the patience to kind of do their thing, as well as the tools they need to get there, can be a huge time saver. The other piece I would say, and I've never really sat in a pure technology seat or a BI seat, but the folks I've worked with that have been most successful in this kind of arena have been the ones that are willing to make the time to interact and ask questions, not just scope, for an hour and then everything else is an email. Like you actually speak with the stakeholders and ask the right questions and push back too. Like you were saying, yeah, we can do the grid. But what else we could do? Like, check this out. We thought of this. What if we
Mm.
did ask those questions back and a lot more can get done. Um, from the business side of it, uh, how to identify, right? That was the question. How to
Yeah.
business lead for those types of individuals. Gosh, that's a tough one, man. I would say a lot of times it comes from people who are really talented in what they're doing already. So we'll just use sales as the example. So that's kind of where I was rooted. I had some experiences where I was pretty good at what I was doing in sales, and I think the moment for me was a particular convenience buyer was like, man, you like seem to have a good handle on a lot of this stuff. Like, why don't you get involved in my process more? And he actually gave me, this was before a lot of these BI tools that we were software referencing even existed. It was like pre-Power Pivot. Um, he just gave me a huge flat file and was like, this is all our data from the last year, store item level. And I want you to hawk over the guys that are drawing my finance. Like, I want you to make sure they're making good decisions. I didn't know what the heck I was doing. So I had
Yeah.
to people to be like, hey, what do I do with this? Cause it was a decent volume of data. And, I knew a little bit about Excel, but that was the moment where someone took the time to be like, hey, check this out. Let's check out pivot table, right? Check out what you can do with this. And that kind of evolved into like, okay, let's store that in like an Access database or something so you can have a larger volume and then you can do your pivot tables. And that was a little bit of what I was talking about in the first answer, which is the patience and like ask the right
Mm.
question. From there, with the experience I had, like that was really the start of all of this for me. It was, that one experience of working with a huge chunk of data from a flat file and turning it into something that I could go impact a business that was actually really important to call my book at the time. Um, that springboarded me into a higher level sales job and springboarded me into category management eventually. And, here I am years later, doing a lot more of the technical side of things and working with very large data sets. So,
Yeah.
and those people that are really good at what they do, but more importantly, avoid those who are complacent and look for people who are highly curious. And, it's not just the curiosity of like, well, how do we get this done? But like, how do I learn how to do this? Like the people that go, oh, I want to do that for myself. I want that faster than what
Yeah.
X department can produce. It's almost like an antsy curiosity. You
Yeah.
want to,
The person that says there has to be a better way.
yeah, totally. And again, I don't think there's not like an inventory or a form you can fill out to determine that. You just have to find the right people. I had a manager once who was, it was right around the time that initial story I was telling about the convenience buyer kind of throwing up a bunch of data on me and then just being like, go do this. My manager was like, hey, this kind of feels like category management. Like, have you thought about that as a career path? And I was like, no, not really. I just want to sell boxes. Right? I just want to sell beer. But being the type of person that I was, there was some training that was available through my company, and I was like, I'll just do it just in case. Let's see what this is about. Maybe it'll help me with this customer, and it'll enable me to sell more boxes, right? And so I did that, and it eventually got to the point where I was doing it with other customers as well. I kind of figured out a few tricks, like, hey, I can be not just your salesman, I can be your consultant for the category as a salesperson, and that just timing wise worked out really well because we had one of our category leads had left our business. I think they went over to Energizer or something. And on their way out, they were like, "Hey, this guy over here, he's into this stuff." And when they came to me to say, what would you think about this job? I was prepared with, hey, I did these 4 courses and I got this certification and I'm not a category manager, but I've done some of the homework and I know how to work with data. So they were like, "It's your job, get in there."
Yeah.
And it was one of the better, she's one of my good friends to this day. And like, she's very, very much responsible for where I am. But it wouldn't have happened if she hadn't been like, "Hey, wait a minute, this kind of looks like a pack,"
Yeah.
She spotted. She spotted the antsy curiosity, and she was like, "Go this way a little bit,"
100%. Yeah. I mean, I think you were also, at least for, this kind of like modern swath of tools, you were definitely an early adopter. And, one of the things that I like whenever I get one of those like kind of known early adopters on is to kind of ask them the story a little bit of like, hey, how'd that happen? So like, it's really cool that that organically happened. Like I just kind of stumbled into it. I've told the story on another pod, but it's just, I really like how you called out the kind of common thread in a lot of those data folks really is just kind of that like this isn't really good enough. Like I bet I could do this faster. Like there's got to be a better way. There's got to be another way. Like yeah,
Yeah,
how much manual work? Like nah, like so that mentality I think I agree with is like the best litmus test. And it's not like something, you can like throw on a form and like expect to get good answers. Like you got to observe somebody like just not stomaching the status quo, right? Like not
yeah,
just being like, man, this is good enough.
yeah. There's I don't remember. I think it may be Simon Sinek uh, talk at some point. I heard it was kind of the theme was like procrastinate with a purpose,
Mm,
and I adopted that. I don't know, about 8 years ago. I started kind of trying to, and the theme is like it gets down to you'd use the word repetition or like, is there a better way? The whole theme that I took away from this um, TED talk that he did was like, don't do anything today that doesn't make you better tomorrow. Right. So, like in our lens, does copying and pasting from one sheet to another and hitting refresh on a pivot table make you better? No, it gets the job done for whoever you're getting that information for, or maybe it's for a presentation you have to deliver. But it's really not making you any better. So at the point that you'd referenced where this self-service kind of explosion happened or started to kind of burn a little, I guess is a better way to say it. It was painful, man. It was like, okay, I don't even think Power Query existed at the time. So it was like that silly Power Pivot, import thing. And it was like, wait, if I use that, I can connect to things and I don't have to copy and paste. This is like a small example, but
yeah.
learn that. And then when Power Query came out, it was like, wow, like I hate repetition. I hate, like, why would I do something like this over and over again when I could just program something to do it for me? And
Yeah.
having, okay, I'll take the time today. It may take me 4 hours today, but over the long term, right, I'm going to find more time. I'm going to make time for myself to do more development, to do more things. So I guess to tie it back to the question we were working on is like, look for people that are like, they hate repetition. They're, they hate complacency.
Yep.
Uh, the
Yeah.
people that want to find that next thing, that's who you look for.
Yeah. I remember when we met, I was doing, most of my consulting work was doing training. So I was like
Yeah.
once to twice a week, like all over the country and the world, just like training squads of people on how to use this stuff. And, I had this mantra of just a different wording of exactly what you just said, just like buy 5 minutes of your life back at a time. But the wrinkle is that like when you buy the 5 minutes back, because it's automated, it's not 5 minutes once. I'm not trading 5 minutes for 5 minutes. I'm trading 5 minutes for 5 minutes a day. And, every once in a while I'd get one of these people who was like kind of already a wizard. Right. And, it'd be like, I'd show them how to do it and they'd be like, yeah, I can actually probably do that a little faster, like the way I'm doing it. Right. And like, sometimes they'd be doing that to show off, but like most of the time it was like this genuine curiosity. Like, is this way really better? Like, are you selling me snake oil? And so then I'd be like, okay, cool. Like, let's walk through this. Right. So like on the initial setup of something new, it takes us about the same amount of time. Maybe you beat me. Maybe I beat you. 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. It's the second time. Because the
Yeah.
second time I'm going to click refresh and I'm going
Yeah.
to be done.
Yeah. Or a script is going to refresh it for you or something.
Exactly.
Yeah, for
Exactly.
sure.
You know?
Yeah. Not the
So
comedy of time, right?
that's exactly it. Yeah, really well said. Really, really well said. Um, you know, I honestly could keep going on this all day, but
Oh,
I actually want to give everybody the opportunity to get to know you a little bit. Tell us a little bit about, you know, just a little on your background, right? You don't have to throw out your social or anything, but like, like just also what do you like doing outside of work? What do you do for fun?
yeah.
Get everybody to know Shawn a bit.
All right, cool. Yeah. If you want to look me up, I'm on LinkedIn. I've been at the Boston Beer Company. I'm actually celebrating my 15th year this year.
That's a big
Well,
deal. That's a lot of beer.
yeah, we're funny. We when we celebrate these anniversaries, you kind of quantify it and I haven't done the math yet, but it's basically 2 cases a month for my entire career is our free beer allocation. So a lot of beers, a lot of beer that run. Had some experience, like I mentioned before, in other CPGs. Worked with Glasso before Boston Beer, and that was really cool because it was at the time a startup,
Yeah.
and then it sold for ridiculous amount of money. Actually, I think at the time it was the largest deal in beverage history.
Yeah.
When Coca-Cola bought Glasso, and
I
so
remember that. Dude,
yeah,
everybody drank vitamin water. Everything was vitamin water.
yeah, dude, right here, man. I still drink.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, that was an amazing experience. I kind of got to learn a lot about how the distributor world worked, launched brands. I basically worked on 3 states in the Southeast. We launched about 45 wholesalers in a matter of like 2 years. It was insane.
Wow.
Before that, I was with Coca-Cola. North America was what it was called at the time, and I was in the fountain business. So I was selling on premise is what we call it, right? So restaurants and bars. I was selling them fountain drinks and working with them. It was really like a street level kind of sales job. And interestingly enough, before all that, the first job I had out of college was in the financial industry. I worked for now shuttered Bear Stearns, and I was a middle markets equity and bond trader here in Atlanta, and that was also a really interesting experience. But won't bore you with all those details. But that's kind of my career history. I went to Wittenberg University in Ohio and played lacrosse there, which I'm still a huge lacrosse guy. I played lacrosse growing up. Grew up in New Jersey,
Yeah.
um, and then moved down to Georgia for a couple of years in high school, and then ended up going to Ohio, to Wittenberg in Springfield, Ohio, to play lacrosse there. It's a little Division III school in the NCAC. And I guess that kind of brings me to like skip a bunch of years. I'm a father of 2 now.
Yeah.
Just turned
Awesome.
last week. I've got
Congrats.
thank you. Got a little girl who's 13, and a little boy who's 9. And my little girl we've had a little bit of a different experience with her. She has cerebral palsy, so she's in a wheelchair, and so that's given me a whole different perspective on lots of different things in her
Yeah.
13 years of being on this earth. And my son is 9, and he's typically developing. So we got, that experience as well, along with my wife, Heidi. And I was kind of trying to draw this all back to lacrosse. My son is now playing lacrosse himself. And I spent a lot of time doing that. Like I coach his U11 team. I've coached his U9 teams. It's funny too, because I think I can tie this back to our larger conversation. When I was coming out of college, NCAA athlete, I was always like, I'm a player, not a coach. No, not a coach. I actually tried a little bit of coaching right when I got out of college, and I was like, this is awful. Like I couldn't, right? I was too much still in that moment of like, I don't know the best way to describe it, but I was too much of that player. And now I'm a little older, and I actually have a self-interest of my son being, a part of
Yeah.
some, um, I really learned a lot more about what that is. And I think that's transferred to work a good bit too. It's helped expand my patience. It's giving me a different lens on things. And I love doing, I spend a lot of time on that, man. Like, just a ton. He plays, rec lacrosse. So like the town we live in, he plays for that. And then he also
Yeah.
on a club team as well, which is super fun because I actually don't have to coach that, and I can like perfect and
Mhm.
walk with things. But that's just a lot of my time right now, and I'm trying to like really cling on to that because I think I've only got a couple more years of being able to do that before he's off in other programs, and like there's no such thing as dad coaches anymore. So
Yeah.
you know, really trying to make the most of that.
I love
When
it.
I, yeah, when I'm not doing that stuff, I do live in the South, live outside of Atlanta, and I love to hunt. I have a buddy, a really close friend of mine that has a timber farm, and we do all kinds of hunting out there, like deer hunting, duck hunting. That's really getting out in nature is such a shift in gears from, the day to day
Yeah. Being in the cave of the computer all day. Yeah.
or really like just getting out in the woods. And, there's a lot of times you get out there and you don't see anything, you don't have a good hunt, but like just being out in the woods and, in nature, it sounds so cheesy, but it's just, that's another really satisfying thing for me is like just getting outside,
I'm with you. I'm a big golfer, at least for the past couple of years. And I played it. My dad was big into it. I played a lot when I was a kid. And like, some days I'll come home. I try to play in the morning before work. My wife will be like, "Hey, how'd you play?" And I'm like, "Terrible." She's like, "You seem like really happy for playing terrible." I was like, "Yeah, it was like nice out." Like it's just
Yeah.
like, who cares? Got out, got some sunshine before the work day.
And
I don't know if we've ever talked about this, but I also was a lacrosse player. I played from like U9 or U10 local U stuff all the way up through high school. Um I was not good enough to play in college, so I just kind
yeah,
of unfortunately, hung up the cleats, but I was a goalie for most of that time. So I was a glutton for punishment, man. I loved, getting pelted with hard rubber balls going 120 miles an hour.
yeah. Well, yeah, it's funny. I don't think we have talked about that.
Yeah.
That's all goalie. I actually read an article the other day about goalies, and it was like the whole thing was like, how do you teach a goalie not to flinch? And there's some great advice in that article. I won't get all into that, but like part of the article was like, there's some people you can teach it, but most of them you can't. You either got it or you don't.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think, like, as far as the reflexes and, like, the willingness to stand in front of, like, a full tilt shot, like, I had that in spades, like, I was good there.
Yeah.
Um, I think I was just, like, too young and immature to realize that, like, if you want to get, like, unbelievably good at, like, throwing clearing passes or, like, like, you just have to, like, invest more time in just, like,
Yeah.
playing wall ball and, like just, like, the same thing, right? I was, like, too young to realize that, like, being good at something takes practice and discipline,
Yeah. Also,
right? It's
dude,
not just natural talent.
it goes right back to what we were talking about. Lacrosse, especially golf is the same way too. I play a little
Yeah.
bit of myself. I've had some health issues earlier this year, so I haven't been playing as much this spring. Plus lacrosse has been taking up a lot of the time. But one of the things I teach the boys all
Yeah.
the time, is like, don't come to practice to learn how to throw and catch, right? That you do that at home
Yep.
because I'm here to learn your team, learn the game, learn the plays, learn all the stuff that makes the game awesome. It's a lot like that kind of theory I was talking about earlier. Like, don't do anything today that doesn't make you better tomorrow. And that's what it took me years with my son, like at least 3 years, to get him to love practicing on his own. And he's finally doing it this year, and he's gotten so much better. So, like, I look at myself when I was 9. I grew up in New Jersey, so I played like you from like second or third grade or something like that.
Yep. Yep.
When I look at him at the same age that I am, and I didn't know all this. I just was out there playing. My dad wasn't involved in lacrosse. He was involved in my life, but he wasn't involved in lacrosse. He didn't know anything about it. So I had nobody telling me this stuff, and I've
Yeah.
been able to coach him to that point. And oh my God, I'm like looking at him, I'm like, he's 30 years past me and he's 9. Like,
Yeah.
he's so
Yeah.
good. I'm like, holy cow. And it's because, I took that learning in college. It college is where I really figured it out for myself, where it was like, you kind of learn to love that time alone, like that, like against the wall or shooting on cage by yourself or working out, like whatever it is. But the way I've had to describe it to my son is like, there's going to be a moment where you do something in a game or in practice that you couldn't do before. It's going to be because of the work you put in over the last 2 weeks, and it's
Mm,
going to go off for you, and then you're going to fall in love with it. And it was like, I wanted to like tell him how to do it, but it was like, dude, I just gave up. I was like, you're just gonna have to figure it out. But I'm telling you, if you don't have reps outside of practice, you're not gonna figure it out. And
yeah.
so, that it's something for all these boys that I coach. Like that's something I try to instill in them. It's like, yeah, lacrosse is about being on the field and being with your team, but it's again, like golf, you got to work on your own. So when you get out on the track, you can do things,
You want to know what's funny? Like as you kind of tied that back, I can't like imagine a better tie back than that, right? It's like those are the exact types of people that we were talking about, right? Like that constant, like, there's got to be a better way. How can I improve this? Right. It's the
Yeah.
same mentality, right? And like that, like, same thing with me in golf or, lacrosse, like, whatever it is. It's just like, it's that mentality thing. And this is just like an outlet for it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny. You got different types of people. I'm sure you've run across these folks like that love recognition. They like public recognition. My boss and I talk about this sometimes, and I'm not really I don't really care about like the award or like being on stage, like Shawn did this, like, that's not really what I'm into. The reward for me is like when I've done something, with a project or with a problem that we're trying to solve. And like, you see that person's face on the other side of the screen or in the meeting and they go, right? Like the jaw drops a little bit from the work that you did. That's what I need. Like, I don't need, money's awesome. Don't get me wrong. Like financial, but I think that
Yeah.
stuff was like getting up those jaw drop moments, and that
Yeah.
stuff organically happens. And yeah, that's for me. It's kind of like what I was telling my son, like that moment you do something like pin a top left corner on the run while you're dodging, and you're going to go, man, that's because I practiced like 5 hours last week on my own on shooting on the run,
Yeah.
the light pays off and you're like, yeah, like it's a better feeling than any award can give you,
Yeah.
because you figured it out. You did it yourself.
I love it. I absolutely love it. All right, man. Well, that's about all the time that we have. I can't thank you enough for coming on. It was so cool to get to hear from someone who has been like number one, like a business first, like found the values of this tool, like early adopter story, which is like really similar to mine as well. Is really, really cool. But also, I think over that time, you've gotten just so much experience and knowledge and like figured out so many of the ways that things can go right and wrong that like your shares were just so full of wisdom.
Yeah,
I
thank
really, can't thank you enough for coming on and sharing that with everybody.
Well, I'm humbled by your invitation, and like I was saying the other day, this is the first podcast I've ever done, so I hope everybody enjoyed it. And yeah, really appreciate the reconnection, man. It's good to talk to you and good to get on the show, man. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely, man. We couldn't be more pumped to have you. I also want to thank the audience. If you laughed or learned something, please make sure to tell somebody else, subscribe to the podcast, give us a review, hopefully a good one. It really, really makes all the difference for us. And thank you again, Shawn, for coming on. Absolutely awesome job today, man. And this has been another exciting episode of the Making Better Decisions podcast. Thanks for joining. That's a wrap for today's episode of Making Better Decisions. For show notes and more, visit makingbetterdecisions.live. A special thank you to our sponsor, Canopy Analytic. Canopy Analytic is a boutique consultancy focused on business intelligence and data engineering. They help companies make better decisions using data. For more information, visit canopyanalytic.com. There's a better way. Let's find it together and make better decisions. Thank you so much for listening. We'll catch you next week. Peace.